Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, scientists, educators, social scientists, government leaders, politicians. Each are one to one. We are a city of contradictions, one of plenty, one of opulence, one of big deals and big wheels. And then we turn the corner and we see another city, one of have-nots. As many of us downsize our dreams, we realize there are many New Yorkers who can't downsize. There's no further way down to go. Our guest today helps those who quite simply don't have enough to eat. Jilly is the executive director of City Harvest, the organization that quite literally rescues good and edible food from businesses and delivers it to more than 600 community food programs in the city. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
I was just reading in the New York Times the other day that the number of Americans who are on food stamps is expected to reach 28 million this year, the highest number since the food stamp program began in the 1960s. Clearly, a lot of Americans are having trouble putting food on the table. How is City Harvest feeling the impact of this?
City Harvest is serving over 1 million New Yorkers. We know that over 1 million New Yorkers are turning to emergency feeding programs. City Harvest is working hard to help bring the food to those programs and at the same time work with those programs to ensure that all of those people who are eligible for food stamps are taking them up. And I think, to your point, we're going to see that trend of people recognizing they have a need in the household, food is scarce for them, will be turning to those kind of assistance programs.
Now that's 1 million out of 8 million. Mm-hmm. That's a lot. And is that up from last year?
We're seeing demand increasing, and it's up from the last time we conducted a hunger study, which was 4 years ago. And we anticipate it will continue to climb. There's really a great need in the city at the moment.
Now, City Harvest has been around since 1982.
That's right.
How did it get started?
It was in response to the problem of hunger that existed in New York City in the 80s as well. Much of that hunger was seen on the streets, and the community programs that existed then were providing meals to people on perhaps an intermittent basis. And City Harvest was started by volunteers who were responding to that need in the city and taking food from one part of the city where it wasn't needed, largely working with restaurants, and taking it to other parts of the city where the food was very much needed.
Describe the organization, sort of its makeup, how it works.
City Harvest is constantly in action, is one of the things that drew me to it in the first place. It's a simple solution to a very urgent problem in the city, and we're constantly on the move with a fleet of 16 refrigerated trucks, picking up food from retailers, from wholesale markets, from restaurants, and delivering it to over 600 community programs throughout the 5 boroughs, usually all in the same day.
Mm-hmm. Now, when one thinks about you're picking up surplus food from these places, it's hard not to envision leftovers being scraped off of platters and out of pots, and old produce is not good enough, for the restaurant being tossed into boxes. I hope that's not what happens. So how does that work?
Well, it's definitely not what happens. We've had a great deal of emphasis, especially in the last 4 years, on making sure that the food we bring is of the highest quality, is of the highest possible nutritional value. And so, no, we don't, and nor have we ever in the 25-year history seen plate waste. The focus more recently, though, has been on nutritional value, as more and more New Yorkers really stagger under the burden of nutrition-related diseases, especially in the low-income neighborhoods that we're serving. We see escalating rates of diabetes, obesity, and so it's more important for us to make sure that the food we bring is nutritious and good quality, and we do a great job working in partnership with those food donors, over 1,900 of them throughout the city.
So what kind of food are you picking up, and what's their incentive for giving it away?
Well, we have a lot of emphasis on fresh produce. We try to pick up as much dairy and protein as we can. We pick up bread. And if you turn then to something like fresh produce, we work very closely with Hunts Point Wholesale Market. And there are vendors who, as it comes to Thursday or Friday, they have still very good quality fresh fruits and vegetables that they know from their experience won't necessarily hold over the weekend. The quality won't be quite as good on Monday as it was on Thursday. They'll have a harder time selling it, so they'll donate that to us. And we pick up a huge amount from just one donor like that.
Now, how about from a restaurant? What would you be getting from a restaurant?
Well, that varies. We have some chefs who will prepare a tray of lasagna, let's say, or several trays of lasagna. We have worked very closely with someone like John Doherty at the Waldorf, who really stepped in to help out when we had a huge delivery of pumpkins, some of the pumpkins very large. And he swung into action with his team and made pumpkin soup.
Okay.
Which is a great way for a restaurant to get involved. And then we have a restaurant like Le Bernardin, whose chef owner, Eric Repaire, sits on the board of City Harvest, that has a refrigerator in the restaurant exclusively for City Harvest.
So if you have some lasagna or some pumpkin soup from, you know, the Waldorf or wherever, or Le Bernardin, where does that go? You pick it up, and where does it go from there?
So that kind of food will be taken to a soup kitchen on the whole. If we're picking up 200 pounds of bagels, we may take that to a food pantry to go into a pantry bag that will feed a family. We rely very heavily on our drivers. You know, many people know us for our trucks and our drivers that are constantly on the move throughout New York City. And the drivers are all trained in food safety. And so they are charged with making on-the-spot decisions about whether this is food that they believe is safe for them to take. There's a great deal of emphasis on never rescuing a pound of food that isn't safe. And they make decisions about where along their route they're going to drop that food. And they know their donors, and they know the agencies that they're taking the food to. So they're really on the front line of what we do.
Can I find out where I can get some lasagna that's come from a two-star restaurant, so I can go to the pantry and get some?
Well, we would give you a guide to the 3-star restaurant.
Okay. You have sponsors. I mean, you have donors.
Yes.
And you also have sponsors. Tell me about your sponsors.
Well, our sponsors are really critical to getting involved in many, especially in many of our fundraising programs. We have a lot of sponsors who are prepared to get involved in those initiatives. We have a big fundraising initiative that's really aimed at helping to feed children and their families coming up in May, which is called Skip Lunch, Fight Hunger. And it's one day on May 14th when we invite people to get involved and donate what they would usually spend on lunch that day, donate it to City Harvest. And so we'll have sponsors who'll get involved in that kind of initiative.
And what would that money go for?
That money goes into helping find the more than 20 million pounds of food that we move every year into soup kitchens and food pantries. And we work very hard to make sure that the food we take there is nutritious, and that will be geared at, as I said, helping children and families.
What kind of food would you reject?
We reject food that isn't of a good enough quality, obviously. That's back to making sure every pound is a safe pound. We try not to reject too much food because somewhere it's needed, you know. We're not the nutrition police. We have a great initiative called Street Fleet, where if we are picking up, or if we've seen places that are wanting to donate less than 20 pounds of food, it really doesn't make sense for us to send a large truck to pick that up. So we have a group of volunteers who will go on foot to pick that food up. We work very closely with Starbucks. Many of those donors are Starbucks donors, and the volunteer will walk the food from the Starbucks to probably a local soup kitchen.
What would you get from Starbucks?
Well, so we get great food from there. You know, we may be picking up sandwiches, salads, and pastries. And
and a small macalata aqua mocha supreme
for the trip to the soup kitchen.
Okay.
What we've heard from the people who are running those programs, because I wondered, how effective is this? It's very effective, because those pastries can be what draws somebody in to get some other kind of assistance.
Right.
And a lot of the emergency feeding programs, like everybody, is running on a very tight budget, and they couldn't afford to bring in something like pastry. And it's a treat. There's nothing wrong with having a treat like that.
So would you go to the market, say, once a week, and would you hit the restaurants once a week or nightly, or what's the
Well, it really
schedule?
depends. There are definitely some donors that we're calling on every day. There will be bakers in the city that we're calling on every day to get bread at the end of the day, and we'll be taking that to a soup kitchen every day. There'll be donors who maybe we're calling on just once a week, and maybe a couple of emergency feeding programs that we're delivering to once or twice, 3 times a week, depending on their own opening hours.
Right. Now, how much food do you pick up in the course of a week? And how many contributors do you have?
Well, we're picking up over 20 million pounds of food a year.
Okay.
And distributing it. And that translates to approximately £56,000 a day. And we're on the road 7 days a week. I mean, we're constantly in action, taking food from where it's not needed to where it is needed.
In terms of the makeup of your donors, what percentage would be restaurants as opposed to wholesalers or retailers? What's the kind of breakdown?
Well, we have over 1,900 food donors, regular food donors. Around 15% of what we pick up is coming from restaurants.
15?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's changed over time. One thing we have noticed with food donors, and I think we're going to see increasingly as costs of food go up and continue to go up, is our food donors are becoming much less wasteful, which is really what should be happening. And we've seen that across the board with our food donors. And so that just challenges us to find more creative ways to get the food that's needed in New York City into New York City.
Given the current recession, has there been a decline in food donations as a result of people being less wasteful or whatever, or not stocking as much food?
Well, it's something we're watching very carefully. I mean, we have to work hard to make sure the food we can deliver, put on the tables of New York's hungry, doesn't go down. We saw through January and February, as compared to the same period last year, we saw a slight decline in baked goods and prepared foods of around 11% over the year before. But, there isn't an overall decline, because
Okay.
we've been able to make that poundage loss up in other areas like meat, which is really a high value donation, fresh fruits and vegetables, which again has high nutritional value. So City Harvest has a terrific staff that's working hard day in, day out to find new sources of really good quality food. So a decline in some areas is made up in others.
Okay. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with more with Jilly Stevens, Executive Director of City Harvest, right after this message.
This is a family that was almost fed by neighbors who almost volunteered to help them out. Almost volunteered. When it comes to giving, almost doesn't count.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York, and I'm talking with Jilly Stevens, Executive Director of City Harvest. So how many people get food from you, say, in the course of a week or a month or a year?
City Harvest is providing food to over 250,000 people a week. And that's 52 weeks a year. And it's a number that obviously we all wish weren't so high, but it is a very high number. We anticipate we'll see that climb in terms of the number of people needing the type of emergency food we're providing.
Do you ever go out to the distribution centers, and are you surprised at who you see coming to get food there?
The answer to both is yes. It's very clear that the face of hunger has changed over the last few years. We see, I think it's common when we talk about people who are hungry and turning to emergency food programs, perhaps to conjure up a homeless person. That's no longer true. The homeless are turning to emergency feeding programs still. Growing numbers of families, families who have homes, families who have jobs, they're turning to emergency feeding programs in increasing numbers, which is a big concern.
Are most of the people, are they already on food stamps in addition to the food pantries?
Well, a lot of people are. Not enough are, though, and that's one of the areas.
Not enough people are on food stamps.
Not enough people are on food stamps where they are eligible to be on food stamps. I read something just this morning, which is that when you look at the senior population in New York City, which is growing in number, just 32% of seniors in New York City who are eligible for food stamps actually take them. Mm-hmm. And of that group, they report that they've run out of food stamps about halfway into the month, and so that's when you would start to see people turning.
That the elderly have, or that
the elderly, halfway through the month, the food stamps have run out, and that's the time when people will turn to emergency food, especially.
I see.
Food stamps tend to run out early in the month.
Do you have a sense of why the participation in the food stamp program is so low?
Well, there are many reasons, and I think there's been a lot of attention, quite rightly, paid to this. It has been a complex application process, and work has been done to sort of ease that a little bit. Awareness of the availability of this benefit is certainly something that we all need to be working on.
I know that was an issue for the city, not really telling people that they were eligible or not making it easy enough for them to apply.
And I think that's right, and these are all things that the city and groups like City Harvest and our partner organisations in the city are working to change. It's a benefit that has to be taken. By not taking it, we're leaving a huge amount of money on the table. It's a federal assistance program.
You talked about seeing people who are not what we would define as poor, who have homes, who have jobs, who just the food budget, isn't going as far as it used to. Are you also seeing more people who could be described as newly poor, or do you get a sense of that?
I think that is happening, and I think we're going to see that increasingly, especially as we feel the full impact of a recession. We hear daily reports of people considered middle class turning to emergency feeding programs as they're struggling, like the already poor people, especially here in New York City, those living at or below or just above poverty are struggling to pay their rent,
right.
Heat their homes, pay medical bills, pay the utilities, all things that you can't decide not to do one month.
Right.
Where they can make a decision is when it comes to food, and so you can make a decision not to have a meal, to skip a meal, buy less food, and we're definitely seeing more and more people put into that position.
I would assume that your overhead may have increased with gasoline prices going through the roof. Do you have transportation sponsorship, or do the oil companies chip in at all to help?
We would love to see an oil company come on as a sponsor. It's something we need to be focusing more on.
Especially since they're making so much money these days.
It would be nice to think we could get them involved. In the meantime, what we have done is made a decision to convert our fleet of 16 trucks to hybrid vehicles.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it will be the first hybrid refrigerated fleet of its kind in the country. And we expect to have that complete sometime next year.
So that's part what and what? A hybrid vehicle.
A hybrid vehicle it's the vehicle we've chosen is perfect for an urban environment like New York City. It's taking energy from the braking system. It doesn't need to be plugged in, and it'll cut our fuel consumption by conservative estimates 40%.
So it's part electric and part Oil, is that the deal?
Yes, it's partly diesel, so it'll still run on diesel, but it'll take energy from the braking system as well.
And you said it will cut your oil costs by how much?
We estimate 40%.
Wow.
Now, these are brand new vehicles. They're just starting to come off the production line. So everybody's eagerly waiting to see, really where are the savings and where can we reduce our emissions as well. That's very important in a city like New York. We have a vision statement that envisions healthier communities. That's not just through the reduction in nutrition-related diseases. There are other, crippling diseases like asthma, and anything City Harvest can do to impact that too, we must. And we think that this green fleet is really important.
What's the gap between what's needed and what you're able to provide?
It's huge and it's growing. We've seen, as demand is increasing in New York City, as more and more people are turning to emergency feeding programs, the amount of donated food available, especially through the federal emergency assistance and feeding programs, is declining. And that's a big problem. And City Harvest has always been the private response to hunger. We haven't distributed federal or government food. So we have to really step up that private response to hunger and go back to our food donors and ask them to give more where they can and source new food donors. And one of the ways we can do that is by working with New York State farmers who, perhaps faced with the prospect of ploughing under a crop because they can't bring it to market, we can help them recover their sowing and growing costs, and that's great food we can get into the city. It's local, it will last longer, the quality's better.
I've heard from my parents and friends about the old days when people would get the government cheese, from the federal government. What kinds of food does the federal government provide now? Well,
it's there's a lot of commodities that are provided, and that is what's shrinking, and I think will continue to shrink as the cost of food goes up. There will be fewer commodities, and that's really been in decline over the last several years. And it's estimated that the emergency feeding programs who receive this type of food assistance have seen around 12 million pounds of food essentially wiped from their shelves over the last few years.
What surprised you most when you came to the organization?
What surprised me most really was the scale of the problem. It's just inconceivable that in a city as wealthy as New York City, with a population of 8 million people, that really such a high number of them, and the estimate of over 1 million is probably conservative, and especially now, we could be looking up at close to 25%, if not more, of those people are turning to emergency feeding programs.
Wow.
That's a huge problem.
You talked about the whole nutritional concern. Certainly Mayor Bloomberg has placed an emphasis on healthy, less fatty foods, and he's put certain restrictions on the restaurants, and label, what they have to reveal on the walls and on the menus. How do you deal with that issue in terms of trying to provide healthier food to people?
Well, we have placed a great deal of emphasis on sourcing fresh fruits and vegetables and introducing those into low-income neighborhoods where perhaps that type of food is not easy to come by. And when you can come by it, maybe the quality isn't as good as it might be, or the prices are higher than they should be. So we placed a great deal of emphasis on really flooding those low-income neighborhoods with as much fresh fruits and vegetables as we can.
Other than being a food picker-upper and distributor, are there other programs that you sponsor? For instance, I think you said something to me privately about cooking classes, for instance.
Yeah, City Harvest has been conducting nutrition education classes for many years, with increasing emphasis over the last few years, as we've really put much more fresh fruits and vegetables into the hands of people who need them. We've combined that with cooking classes, so teaching children, seniors, adults how to cook with the food that we're bringing, how to enjoy fresh fruits and vegetables and incorporate them increasingly into their diet. As I've said, the neighborhoods we're taking food to are staggering under the burden of diseases that are nutrition-related, like diabetes. And we've responded to that need, working very closely with the community. And we've let our nutrition education programs evolve. So we now have nutrition education programs that are diabetes-focused and help people learn to live with diabetes and how to eat right. And that's something that is continuing to grow for us.
Looking forward, what do you want to see happen?
What I want to see happen looking forward is for those low-income neighborhoods in New York City to change, for the face of those to change. So we're seeing...
How so?
Well, we need to see less hunger. We need to see more good quality, affordable food available to people living in low-income neighborhoods.
Through the supermarkets or the local markets, or...?
It would be great to see more supermarkets coming in, the shops and supermarkets that are already in those neighborhoods to perhaps be stocking more food that's affordable, that's good quality, and making it easy for people who are already living, you know, a very often very stressful life. You know, a lot of the people we're serving are holding down 2 or 3 jobs. Many single mums are being served through City Harvest. And let's not add to that by making it difficult for them to eat well.
Well, I'm sorry we're out of time, and I want to thank Jilly Stevens, Executive Director of City Harvest, for joining me. For the City University of New York and One to One, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.